Hey guys, it's Bree here at Blossom and Branch Farm, and we are under threat of snow today, and I have not gotten the things done that I need to get done in the garden. And you might be feeling the same. For a lot of you at home, you're squeezing in gardening between a lot of other important things. Today I'm going to show you the things that I'm prioritizing here in the garden in terms of preparation for winter. And also, if you only have a little bit of time, I'm going to show you your 5-minute, 10-minute, and 15-minute guide to winterizing your roses. Let's go. Of course, when you have all of this space like we do here at the market farm, there is a lot to do. There's never nothing to do. But that being said, there are things that are going to set up my plants to be much better next year. And if I skip those things, I have just learned that I regret it in the spring. So trying to get it done here today. I'm going to start with my roses. I get so fed up with the roses and the Japanese beetles every year. And so I was going to tear them out, but of course, then roses happen and I get enamored with how beautiful they are, and I forget everything that I said about wanting to tear them out. So I left the roses in, which means I now need to winterize them. Now last year I did not winterize them because I said I'm tearing them out. Then I changed my mind. If you're in a warmer zone or you have hardier roses, you don't have to do this. But I grow a lot of David Austins that are delicate cuts. Now, while they survived the winter, despite my lack of winterizing, here they are, they did survive. They were late to bloom in the spring, and that was a real bummer because by the time I was getting the big blooms that I wanted, it was Japanese beetle season. That's a big bummer. I'm going to show you the other reason why I'm winterizing and why this helps. Now, we got our unexpected snowstorm a couple weeks ago. You guys might have seen that video where we had that huge snow, and it was pretty unexpected and really heavy. And what happened was it broke a lot of the canes. So you can see what happens when you get those big heavy snowstorms over the winter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut back a lot of these taller ones so that at least with the snow, if we do get a lot of snow, it's not going to weigh them down again and break them like it did in our last big snowstorm, because that is really damaging to the plant. So I'm going to prioritize that first, and then I'm going to winterize them with this burlap because that's going to help with the winter die-off. Oh, but according to the sheet, my priority right now is feeding them. I also wanted to do a quick check-in so you guys can kind of see what things are looking like. Here we've got our hairy vetch cover crop. It has been fairly eaten, actually. There are quite a things eating and nibbling on this cover crop, which is why it's looking a little bit sparse, but this will survive the winter. It's going to start to look like it's dead, but it actually survives the winter. It starts regrowing in the spring, so we'll have to terminate it in spring. We also have a cover crop here of oats and peas. This has mostly died back as it typically does for the winter, but you can see it kind of leaves this mulch debris. This is why I hate plastic. Look at this. What is this from? This isn't from me. This plastic heart thing. I don't know where these things come from. But okay, so the peas are still growing. The oats, a little bit are growing, but mostly have died back, although they're starting to resprout a little bit from the base. So mostly in here, we've got the peas. Those are going to die in the winter time. They're not going to come back. If you want to learn more about cover cropping, we actually have a course just in time for Black Friday. It's going to be on sale. If you purchase it as a bundle with our regenerative gardening class, I'll put all that information down here at the bottom of this video. Here is the only other thing that I do in my field heading into winter. I've covered up my dahlias. You guys might recall that we don't dig and store dahlias. It is a huge waste of time for me. I hate doing it. I don't do it anymore. And here in zone 5, 6, I wasn't sure if this would work, but this is now year 3 of doing this, where I don't dig them up. I just cover them with a lot of leaves. You can see how thick these leaves are. It's probably about, it was 2 feet of leaves. It's kind of compacted down now with the weight of this tarp on top. And then we do tarp over it. What we want to prevent is moisture and rot happening in those dahlia tubers. So by tarping it, that's going to help with that. Now, normally I don't like to use plastic in the field. You guys know this, so I don't use landscape fabric, but I haven't found a good way to keep that moisture out of those beds without using it. I don't have as many concerns about using it over the winter because this ends up under a pile of snow. It's not being as exposed to UV rays, and therefore it's not breaking down as rapidly as, for example, landscape fabric. Here's another row of dahlias with our tarp over it, weighed down, of course, because otherwise the wind. Hey boys, I hear you. I hear that you are starving to death. I hear it. Oh, midnight. Are you so hungry? Are you gonna eat your brother? Now, I do have to say that the list of things that I don't do in the winter is much longer than the list of things that I do. For example, I really leave pretty much everything that I can in the field, in the garden. So you can see, even though they get all weighed down, they flop over, things start to fall, what's happening is we're getting some natural mulching. And this is the way that these, especially a lot of these native plants, are designed to work. So you can see, this is Anophelis margaritaceae, or Pearly Everlasting. And it's a really pretty white flower. You may have seen me show it before. And what happens is it just weighs itself down, flops over, and it's created some mulch on top of the soil. So this is protecting the soil the way that nature wants it to be. So not only is it doing that, this is helping to spread some seeds. These seeds are laying down right on top of the soil. That's gonna help germinate those in nature. Now in the field, obviously, I don't necessarily want too much reseeding, but I also don't worry about it too much. This side of the field in particular is pretty wild and full of natives. Now what I do like to do is make sure that my soil is covered. So you saw the cover crop over there. Here I've got pine needles on top of the soil because we did not have a cover crop in here. So just even keeping this pine needle mulch on top of the soil is helping to protect it over winter. And that's why I like using pine mulch. Some people call it pine straw, is because it stays in place, unlike real straw, which tends to blow away, especially in my zone. So between cover cropping, pine needle mulch, any kind of mulch, really, leaves, those are things that are helping to keep our soil covered for the winter. And it's the same here. So you can see all my baptisia here also flopped over in that first big storm. But also look how nicely they have mulched themselves. So they are keeping their own soil protected, helping protect against erosion over the winter. Now that being said, I do cut down my peonies. So peonies are prone to things like powdery mildew. These are ones that you should be cutting down every year unless you have tree peonies. The herbaceous peonies and the Ito intersectional peonies, typically you're going to be cutting all the way down. So I've cut those down already. I usually do that once those leaves are dying back or started to die back or have died back. And I just use, because we have so many of them, I just use my big bush hog to do that. And that way I can do a lot of them all at once. Otherwise, it's really time consuming. If you don't have one of those, just cut it all the way down at the root. And peonies are one that I don't add mulch to in the fall. So in the spring, I might mulch my peonies. And then usually by the fall, a lot of that has kind of broken down. I don't mulch them over the fall because we don't want to keep the soil around our peonies artificially warm. They need freeze time to bloom for the next year. So I don't want to keep my peonies warm like I do my roses, which is what I'm going to do now. If you only have 5 minutes to spend winterizing your roses, start by cutting down those long canes, because what you don't want is that breaking all the way down at the base, because then your roses are going to have to start all over from scratch. I know pruning roses can seem intimidating, and remember, this really is not a prune. This is a winter cut down to help prevent breakage. So you don't have to panic as much and you can be pretty quick with it. So again, if you don't even have time to wrap them up with burlap, at least do this, because at least if you can keep them from breaking at the base, it's gonna help the rose long term. So I usually like to do a nice deep cut. Again, in the spring, we'll come back through and go a little bit neater with this, cutting off all those pieces that are smaller than a pencil, any that are crossing and rubbing each other. But for right now, I'm really focusing mostly on just the length. And that not only is gonna make it easier for me to wrap them and winterize them, it's also gonna make it easier for me to work around them. You might know that often pruning results in regrowth, and that's why we don't wanna do this early in the season. And I'm also not really cutting back very much, but on these longer ones, this rose is Lady of Shalott, and Lady of Shalott is just a grower. She just gets very long and lanky. This is all one season of growth. And again, you saw how that growth really gets weighed down in the snow. I'm gonna go get my good gloves. Please be sure to wear gloves when working with roses, because rose thorn wounds can be dangerous. My uncle almost lost an arm due to an infection from a rose thorn. So They can be dangerous. Be careful. Wear gloves. I'm gonna get cut. Okay, I've gotten these all trimmed down. Didn't take very long. So again, if you only have a little bit of time before a big snow, and your roses still haven't defoliated, just cut them down real quick. You don't necessarily have to worry about this next step. If you have 10 minutes, you're gonna want to cut those down and then throw some wood chip mulch around the base. You can also use whatever mulch you have on hand. If you have leaf mulch on hand, that works too. But I'm going to, because I found that if I do this step, my roses have much less dieback in the spring. So I get much better on that first, so that first flush of blooms is much better for me. The stems are longer, they're much more usable. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to pile up some wood chip mulch just around the base of the plant. So basically we're just trying to insulate the roots. This is especially important if you have a grafted rose. So say that there's grafted and then there's own root. So if your rose is own root, if it dies all the way back to the roots, not a big deal. It'll grow back with the same plant. But if it's a grafted rose, that means a different root stock. So if you've ever had a rose die back all the way and it reblooms and it's a red rose, for example, or something you didn't actually plant, that's why. It's because it died back to the root and it was a different root stock. So these are not own roots. Some of them are own roots, some of them are not, but either way, I'm gonna mulch the roots and then we'll burlap around it. If you have 15 minutes to winterize your roses, that's when you're going to be doing that burlap wrap and wrapping the base of your rose and even a little bit up, especially for climbing roses. They will really benefit from getting that burlap wrap higher up. So I've just gotten a roll of, this is 18-inch burlap, and I'll link this down below. And burlap is great, especially if you have climbing roses. You can also wrap it around tree trunks, so lots of different purposes in the garden for burlap. And I'm going to use this just like you would a rose collar. So rose collars are typically plastic. I don't like them because they really constrain you on the size of the rose. So if the rose is bigger than the rose collar, you have to use 2 of them. It's just, they can be costly if you have a lot of roses. Okay, I'm just going to go around my rose, give it a good little hug. Okay, I'm just going to go around my rose, give it a good little hug. This is definitely easier if you have 2 people. And go around it twice. Cut it off. You could wrap this off with twine, especially if you're in a windy area, but I've got this stuck to a thorn. It feels pretty secure, so I'll just keep an eye on them in case we're getting wind, and this is good. Now you can customize how much you're wrapping based off your zone. So if you're in a really cold zone and maybe your roses aren't quite hardy to your zone, I would double up on this burlap. We're gonna go ahead and get all these wrapped, hopefully before the sun goes down. And I've gotten almost all of the roses here burlapped. I also just like the look of this better than those ugly white plastic things. Now, if you want extra protection, you can take some of this wood chip mulch and you can actually just fill in. You could also do this with leaves and just fill in your burlap. And that'll just give a little bit of extra insulation in there. The last thing I'm going to do is prune my lavender, and lavender pruning I find is really, really important to get done at least before winter. If you can't do it after the blooms fade, which is better, you can go watch our lavender pruning for that, but if you can't do it then, do it at least before winter time, because otherwise that's when you get that woody growth on your lavender. Not good. All right, I've got my tool that I use for my quickest pruning because these dark clouds are coming. So my fast pruner is my sickle. I love the sickle. I know every time I use it, people are thinking that I'm gonna cut my finger off. You need to be careful when you are using a sickle. However, you should not be cutting toward yourself. People always say this, don't cut toward yourself. You're really not cutting toward yourself when you're using a sickle. You're really cutting in a slicing motion diagonally away from you. So even though from the front it might look like you're cutting toward yourself, you're not. That being said, I recommend being very careful when you're doing it. Watch your fingers at all times. But because I only have probably, I'd say 5 minutes to get all these lavender done. I've gotten almost all of them. I just have to get the last row. But because I don't have much time, I'm gonna use this guy. So it's always funny when I'm out here with my sickle and people drive by and I'm like, hi. All right, so what you want to do when you're cutting and pruning your lavender is make sure that you are not cutting into the woody stem. So you can see here is my woody stem down here. It literally starts to get brown and woody right around here. You don't want to be cutting into that part. So you want to stay up and above here into this green part. So I'm going to grab and cut. Handful. All right, done. Let's move down the row. So I hope this helps clarify what you want to be doing if you only have a limited time window in the garden to be getting your things prepped for winter. All right, I gotta go. We still got daylight, so back to work for me. I'll see you guys around here next time at the farm.